What if the man everyone overlooked, the quiet mechanic at the edge of town, held the key to a miracle no one saw coming? In the heart of a blizzard, a desperate voice crackled over an old radio. No one answered, except him. What began as a rescue turned into a reckoning, with grief, with memory, and with a second chance at love. This is the story of a single dad who fixed more than engines. He mended hearts. If stories of quiet courage, healing love, and unexpected hope speak to you, subscribe now and stay with us. Because sometimes the most powerful journeys start in silence and end in the sky. Now let's begin. The snow had been falling for nearly 16 hours. From inside his small garage tucked at the edge of Pine Ridge, Colorado, Jack Remington could barely see the outline of his truck, parked just 10 feet away. The blizzard roared outside like an angry beast, relentless and wild, shaking the metal siding of the building and hurling snow in dizzying, blinding circles. Jack stood over the engine of an old snowmobile, hands blackened with oil and grease-mined miles away. The propane heater at the corner hissed faintly, doing little to cut the deep mountain cold that had seeped into everything. Ellie, his 7-year-old daughter, was asleep inside their log cabin just across the snowy driveway. Safe. Warm. Dreaming, he hoped. He had just reached for his wrench when a burst of static came through the dusty emergency radio bolted on the wall. He paused. The old radio hadn't worked properly in months. Another crackle. Then faint, but unmistakable. "Please, anyone, this is Clara Monroe. This is..." The bus went off the road. I think I'm the only one left." Jack froze. He turned up the volume, adjusting the dial until the static steadied into a faint but desperate voice. "I'm at mile marker 72, somewhere below the ridge. I have a student with me. She's not breathing right. I don't know how long we have." Silence. Jack didn't hesitate. He ripped off his gloves, bolted out the garage door, and sprinted through the blinding snow to the shed behind the house. His boots sank nearly to the knee. The wind clawed at his face, but none of it registered. The only thing that mattered was the voice, shaky, terrified, and very likely running out of time. Inside the shed, beneath a tarp, and layers of dust and rust, sat the thing he swore he'd never touch again. A battered Bell 206 helicopter, a relic from the days when he and his younger brother Ethan had flown rescue missions for the National Guard. Ethan had loved that bird. Jack had never climbed inside it since the crash. But tonight wasn't about the past. Tonight was about a woman stuck somewhere in the storm, with a child and a dying hope. Jack yanked the tarp free and pulled open the side panel. Fuel low but manageable, rotor blades intact, battery dead. No matter. He ran back to the garage, grabbed his portable jumper toolkit and a spare gas can, then worked furiously under sleet and darkness. His fingers went numb. The wind howled louder. But muscle memory kicked in, connecting hoses, bleeding the lines, restarting hydraulics. Just like old times. Just like with Ethan. 35 minutes later, the blade started to turn. He pulled on his old flight jacket, laced his boots tight, and climbed into the cockpit. As the bird lifted shakily into the air, the town of Pine Ridge disappeared beneath a curtain of white. The sky seemed to close in gray and furious. Jack gritted his teeth and flew into the storm. The radio crackled again. "This is Clara. We're so cold. The girl Emily, she's not moving." Jack's knuckles whitened around the controls. He was flying blind. There were no lights on the ridge, only white. He thought of Ellie curled up in bed with her stuffed bear. He thought of Ethan, whose final flight had ended in flame and silence. Not again. Not this time. He scanned the slope near mile marker 72. Nothing. Then, just as doubt began to creep in a faint flicker, a tiny trembling glow at the base of a pine tree below. He dropped altitude. There, wedged between two trees, was a crumpled yellow school bus, its windshield shattered, one side buried in snow, the rear emergency door flung wide open, and in the doorway, wrapped in a tattered blanket, a woman with frostbitten lips and blood on her temple holding a limp child in her arms. Clara Monroe. Jack hovered and landed in a narrow clearing 20 yards away, skids trembling on uneven snow. He ran toward her. "Hold on!" he shouted. "I'm Jack! I'm here to help!" She looked up, eyes glazed, her lips parted, but no words came. He scooped the child from her arms, Emily barely breathing, and then grabbed Clara's waist, supporting her frozen frame, as they stumbled back to the chopper. Inside, the heat barely worked, but it was better than the storm. He wrapped the child in every spare jacket he had. Clara trembled violently, eyes locked on the girl. "Is she?" Jack shook his head. "She's alive, but she needs warmth. Oxygen." He pulled off his gloves, pressed his bare hands against Emily's cheeks, and murmured words he didn't even know he remembered from his own days in rescue. "Stay with me, sweetheart. Just a little longer." They flew through the snow like a bird made of rust and willpower. It took an hour to reach the emergency clinic in town, but Emily started to stir halfway through, just enough to whimper, just enough to breathe. When Jack landed, nurses rushed out with stretchers. Clara refused one. She limped beside Jack as they wheeled Emily inside. Before the ER doors closed, Clara looked up at him. You're not a pilot." Jack met her gaze. His voice came out rough, dry. "I was. A long time ago." She nodded as if that answered more than it said. Then she followed the child into the light. That night, as snow still fell over Pine Ridge, Jack stood alone beside the chopper. He looked up at the sky, gray and bruised, and whispered to the wind, "You'd be proud of me, Ethan." Then he turned toward home, toward Ellie, toward whatever was about to begin. Because something had shifted, and he felt for the first time in years that the sky above him had started to open again. By the time Jack Remington stepped into his cabin with Clara Monroe leaning heavily on his shoulder, the blizzard had quieted into a slow, relentless whisper. Snow clung to their boots, to the hems of their clothes, to their skin. The front porch light flickered above them, casting a pale glow across the drift-covered steps. Jack eased open the door. The warmth inside hit them like a wave. "Watch the step," he murmured, guiding Clara gently through the entryway. The cabin was modest, wood-paneled walls, stone fireplace, a kitchen that still smelled faintly of cinnamon and burnt toast. A plaid blanket was tossed across the couch, and a pair of tiny winter boots lay by the fireplace. Ellie's art stick figures and clumsy drawings of horses covered the refrigerator door. "Sit here," Jack said, lowering Clara onto the couch. She winced as she sat, but nodded, teeth clenched. Her cheeks were still flushed from cold, but the blood on her temple had dried. Her hands trembled as she pulled the blanket around her shoulders. "You need anything?" She looked around, eyes unfocused. "Water." Jack moved to the kitchen, filled a glass, and handed it to her. She drank slowly, hands wrapped tight around the cup. The silence stretched thick as the snow outside. Then soft footsteps padded across the wooden floor. Ellie, his daughter, had awakened. 7 years old, with a mop of golden hair and sleepy eyes too wise for her age. She stood in the hallway, in her flannel pajamas, clutching her stuffed bear. "Daddy?" she asked, rubbing one eye. "Who's that?" Jack crouched down beside her. "This is Miss Clara. She's going to stay with us for a little while, just until the storm's over." Ellie looked at the stranger on the couch, then at her father. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Is she sick?" Jack hesitated. "She got hurt. But she's going to be okay." The little girl walked over, curious but quiet. She peered at Clara for a long moment. Then, in the same solemn tone children use when they've decided something important, she said, "You can use my blanket. The blue one. It's the warmest. Clara blinked. Her lips twitched as though she might cry or smile. Jack couldn't tell which. "Thank you," she whispered. Ellie nodded, then padded back to her room without another word. Jack stoked the fire until it blazed, then returned to Clara. "You'll sleep here tonight. The couch is old, but it's soft. I'll bring you some pillows, and that blue blanket she mentioned." Clara looked up at him. Her eyes were dark green, almost mossy in the firelight. "Is she your daughter?" "Yes." "Her mother?" The question hung there like smoke. "Passed away," Jack said simply. 7 years ago, right after Ellie was born." Clara looked down at her hands. "I'm sorry." Jack nodded. "We manage." He brought her pillows, the blue fleece blanket, a pair of wool socks. Then he handed her a bottle of over-the-counter painkillers and a warm compress. "You should sleep." "I will." She hesitated. "Thank you, Jack." He paused. "I didn't do it to be thanked." She nodded. "That's why it matters." In the middle of the night, Jack stood outside on the porch, a mug of coffee cradled in his hands. The snow had stopped completely. The world was still frozen, like it had paused just long enough to let him breathe. He thought of Ethan, his younger brother, full of laughter and fire. Gone in a blaze of wreckage 3 years ago. The helicopter had been Ethan's pride. Jack hadn't touched it since, until tonight. He'd done what Ethan would have done, what Ethan should have done. And somehow, it didn't feel like betrayal anymore. It felt like a beginning. Behind him, the door creaked open. Clara stood there, leaning on the frame. She was wearing a flannel shirt Jack had lent her, sleeves rolled up over her thin wrists. Her cheeks were pale, but no longer ghostly. "You shouldn't be up," Jack said. "I couldn't sleep," she replied. "Too quiet." Jack nodded. "It gets that way up here." She stepped outside slowly, eyes scanning the moonlit snow. "I used to think I liked silence, but there's a difference between silence and emptiness." He sipped his coffee. "Up here, the silence listens. You just have to be patient." Clara folded her arms, then looked at him. "I remember that girl, Emily. Her breathing was shallow. I kept thinking if I closed my eyes, I might wake up and she'd be gone." "She's going to be okay," Jack said gently. Clara nodded, but her lips trembled. "I teach music," she said suddenly. 3rd grade through high school. I was chaperoning the field trip. They asked me to help last minute because I know CPR. She looked down. But that didn't feel like enough when it really mattered. Jack was quiet a moment, then said, "It mattered. She's alive because of you." Clara looked at him again. "And because of you." Jack met her gaze steady. "I just did what had to be done." Clara didn't answer, but she didn't look away either. Back inside, Jack offered to carry her back to the couch, but she declined with a wry smile. "If I'm going to stay here a few days, I should at least be able to walk 10 feet. He chuckled. "Fair enough." As he helped her settle in, she paused. Why was the helicopter still working? Jack hesitated. It wasn't. Not until tonight. Clara looked at him puzzled. "It was my brother's," he said. "Ethan. He flew rescue, died on duty. I hadn't touched that bird since. But something tonight, I don't know. Maybe it was your voice. Maybe it was time." Clara didn't speak, but something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, maybe. Respect. A softening. He turned to leave. "Good night, Clara." "Good night, Jack." That night, under a thick fleece blanket and the rhythmic crackle of firewood, Clara Monroe slept deeply for the first time in days. And in the other room, Jack sat by Ellie's bed, watching her chest rise and fall, thinking not of the storm that had passed, but of the stranger now asleep in his home. A stranger whose voice had brought him back to the sky. The morning broke slow, and silver casting a pale shimmer across the snow-covered valley outside Jack Remington's cabin. The storm had passed, but its silence lingered, wrapping the house in a stillness so deep it felt sacred. Jack stood at the kitchen counter quietly whisking eggs in a chipped ceramic bowl. The smell of bacon drifted through the warm air. The radio on the windowsill played softly, an old country station, half static, half song. He didn't usually listen to music in the mornings, but today didn't feel like usual. Behind him, the creak of the floorboard gave Clara Monroe away. She stepped into the kitchen, slowly still wearing his flannel shirt, and a fresh pair of socks Ellie had picked out, striped ones, too big, rolled at the ankles. Her limp had eased slightly, though every step looked like it cost her more than she let on. "You're up early," Jack said, flipping a strip of bacon. "Smells like breakfast," she replied, managing a faint smile. He motioned toward the table. "Sit. Coffee, please." She lowered herself into the chair with a soft groan, wincing as she shifted. Her hair was damp, tucked behind her ears. Her face looked clearer in the morning light, less haunted. "More. Here." Jack poured her a mug, set it down with 2 creamers and a spoon. She stirred it absently. "How's the leg?" he asked. "Throbbing. But manageable." She paused. "And Emily?" "Did they call?" Jack nodded. "The clinic says she's stable, breathing on her own. Her parents drove in early this morning." Clara's shoulders dropped in relief. Thank God. Jack set a plate of scrambled eggs and bacon in front of her, then one for himself. They ate in companionable quiet, save for the radio and the occasional clink of forks on plates. After a while, Clara said, "Ellie draws well. I saw the pictures on the fridge." Jack smiled. "She's got a thing for horses lately. Thinks she'll ride in a rodeo someday. She's sweet. I like her." "She likes you too," Jack said, then chuckled, "though you'll never get that out of her directly." Clara smiled again, this time wider, then quieter. "This place, it reminds me of where I grew up. Small, quiet, like the silence has weight to it." Jack nodded. "It does. But it listens too." She looked at him. "You said that last night. I meant it." Later that morning, while Jack was out in the garage checking the generator, Clara wandered into the living room, drawn by something she hadn't noticed before. In the corner stood a slightly out-of-tune upright piano, worn and weathered, but still dignified. A few music books sat on its top, yellowed and curling at the edges. Clara hesitated, hand hovering just above the keys. She hadn't touched a piano since the school recital in October. Since the night she'd stood on stage looking at rows of empty folding chairs where Ethan's would have been. He'd promised he'd come, but he'd never had the chance. Her fingers lowered. She played a single note, then another. The sound was dusty, uneven, but real. The vibrations curled into the air like breath in cold morning light. Then she began to play slowly, cautiously Clair de Lune. The melody spilled into the room, broken but tender, and floated down the hallway. In the garage, Jack paused mid-wrench. He hadn't heard that piece in years. His mother used to play it before Alzheimer's stole her memory note by note. Ethan had hummed it sometimes, without even realizing it. He wiped his hands, closed the tool chest, and walked back inside. Clara didn't see him. She was lost in the music. Her body swayed slightly, eyes closed, every key pressed with careful reverence, as if apologizing to the piano for waking it from sleep. Jack stood in the doorway, arms folded, leaning quietly. When she reached the final chord, her fingers hovered there for a breath. Then she let go. Silence returned. She turned and saw him. "I didn't mean to," she started. "Don't apologize," Jack said. Clara stood slowly. It just felt like the house needed it. Jack stepped forward. "So did I." There was a long pause. Not awkward, just heavy. "I haven't played that in years," Clara said, brushing a hand through her hair. "I didn't think I could." Jack looked at the piano. "Still sounds good to me. I used to teach that piece to my older students," she added. "There was one boy, Jacob. He couldn't read a line of music, but he played by ear. Said it made more sense when he closed his eyes. Jack smiled. My brother was like that. Ethan couldn't sit still for a lesson, but give him a melody, and he'd figure it out in 2 tries. Clara's breath caught. Your brother played. Jack nodded. Guitar. Mostly to impress girls, but he had heart. He loved music. Used to say some songs knew things about you before you did. She swallowed hard. I think I met him once. Jack's eyebrows rose. I mean briefly. At a fundraiser for school music programs. He was wearing his flight uniform. Said he had a brother who fixed everything. Jack blinked, surprised. Yeah, that sounds like him. I liked him, she said softly. I did too, Jack murmured. A beat of silence passed between them. Then Jack said, Ellie's been asking to learn piano. I never got around to finding a teacher. Clara tilted her head. Maybe I could show her a few basics. While I'm here, I'd like that. Jack said, voice low. That afternoon, Jack found Clara sitting on the porch swing, wrapped in Ellie's blue blanket, staring out at the forest, as if listening for something only she could hear. He didn't interrupt. The sky above them was soft and open, streaked with gold and pearl. For the first time in weeks, Jack felt the silence in his bones, not as a burden, but as a companion. Inside the house, the piano sat with the lid open. Waiting. The storm had left behind a crystalline world, branches sheathed in ice rooftops, glistening, and pine needles frozen mid-sway, like a painting caught in breathless pause. The town of Pine Ridge slowly exhaled as roads cleared and people emerged, blinking into the brightness that only came after the worst of weather. Inside the cabin, warmth had found a rhythm again. Jack stacked kindling by the hearth, while Ellie sat cross-legged near the coffee table, coloring a picture of a bear wearing a crown. Clara stood near the kitchen window sipping tea. The faint scent of lemon and honey hung in the air. Her limp had lessened, but she still moved with guarded caution. Ellie looked up from her crayons. Miss Clara, what's your favorite color? Clara smiled over her mug. Blue. Not sky blue, deep blue. Like the ocean. Ellie nodded seriously, then began coloring the bear's robe a rich navy. Mine's yellow. Like pancakes. Jack chuckled softly from behind the fireplace screen. He glanced at Clara, catching her grin just before she looked away. They were starting to fall into a pattern. Quiet breakfasts afternoon, talks, music drifting from the old piano, the occasional laugh shared over Ellie's wildly imaginative artwork. But something unspoken still hung between them. A weight. A whisper. Something Jack couldn't name. That evening, as the fire crackled low and Ellie had been tucked into bed, Clara wandered into the hallway with a towel draped around her shoulders, hair damp from a rare bath. Jack was seated at the table with a cup of coffee, flipping through an old photo album Ellie had insisted he dust off. Family history, Clara asked gently. Jack looked up. Ellie asked about her grandma today. Figured I'd show her some pictures when she wakes up. Clara stepped closer. May I? He nodded and turned the album around so she could see. She leaned in, fingers brushing the worn edges of the pages. There were pictures of a younger Jack, slightly leaner, less lined, but still recognizably him. A beautiful woman beside him in most frames, dark-haired, vibrant, laughing with her whole face. Ellie's mother. And then another face appeared. Younger, mischievous, familiar. Clara froze. That's Ethan, Jack said quietly. I remember now, Clara whispered. He had this exact smile when he introduced himself at the gala, like he'd just told a secret and was waiting to see if you got it. Jack smiled faintly. He was all charm. Got away with everything. Her eyes lingered on the photo. Then she looked up. I have something to ask. Jack tilted his head. Do you know if Ethan ever kept things, memorabilia? Letters, maybe. Jack frowned. After he died, I packed up most of his things. Some are in storage, a few boxes in the garage. Why Clara hesitated. Before his last mission, he told me he was working on something, said it was important. But he never said what. I thought maybe. She trailed off. Jack stood slowly. Come with me. The garage was colder than the cabin, but still smelled of cedar and machine oil. Jack flicked on a light. In the far corner behind a stack of old tires and tarps, he dug out a medium-sized wooden chest, worn but intact, with a dent on one corner and his brother's initials carved near the latch. He popped it open and stood back. Inside were photographs, patches, old letters, and a smaller velvet pouch tucked near the bottom. Clara reached for it. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the pouch. Inside was a silver pendant, small, oval, simple. On the back, it bore a single inscription barely visible in the dim light. If I don't make it, give this to her. Clara gasped. Her eyes filled with tears before she could stop them. She clutched the pendant knuckles white, as if it might vanish if she blinked. I never saw that before, Jack said softly. I didn't know. Clara nodded, silent. Her throat worked, trying to swallow past emotion. He was going to propose. We hadn't told anyone yet. He said he wanted it to be quiet. Just us. But then he got deployed. Jack watched her, the weight of it all sinking in. He meant to come back. She nodded. But he didn't. Neither of them spoke for a long while. Then Clara reached into the pouch again and pulled out a folded note tucked alongside the pendant. Her breath caught as she unfolded it. Clara, if anything happens, I need you to know this wasn't a job. You weren't a stopgap. You were it. The real thing. I should have said it better sooner, louder. I should have let you meet Jack. He would have liked you. He fixes things. He'll know what to do with this. Clara's tears spilled freely now. Jack stepped forward, hand resting lightly on her shoulder. You never got that letter. She shook her head. Never. I thought he left without saying goodbye. Jack's voice was low. He tried. Later, back inside, Clara sat on the couch with the pendant still in her hand. Jack brewed tea in the kitchen, quiet and respectful. When he brought her the cup, she looked up. I was angry, she said, eyes distant. For a long time. Not just at him, but at myself. For loving someone who never came back. For not getting a proper goodbye. I kept thinking, maybe I wasn't enough. Jack sat beside her, not too close. He thought you were, he said. She turned to him. I know that now. But knowing and believing are different things. Jack nodded. Sometimes it takes a while to catch up. Clara glanced toward the pendant again. Maybe this was the closure I didn't know I needed. She paused, then looked at him fully. And maybe it's not the end of something. Maybe it's the beginning of something else. Jack met her gaze. There was no rush, no promises. Just a quiet understanding building between them, brick by brick, note by note, word by word. In the background, the radio played a faint melody. Not quite Clair de Lune, not quite anything. Just the sound of two lives slowly shifting toward one another. The following days unfolded with the quiet rhythm of healing. Snowmelt dripped steadily from the roof, forming rivulets that trailed down the cabin's wooden siding. The silence outside was now filled with the chirp of winter birds and the occasional creak of thawing pine. Within the cabin, another kind of thaw was taking place, slower, deeper. Jack watched it happen with a quiet awe. He saw it in the way Clara now moved through the house, not like a guest, but like someone who belonged. She had started cooking small meals, rearranging a few books on the shelves, humming softly as she tuned the old piano one key at a time. She and Ellie had become nearly inseparable, their laughter filling the afternoons as they traced music notes on construction paper or read picture books aloud in the sunny patch by the fireplace. Jack found himself lingering at doorways more than he meant to. Watching. Listening. Something in him long dormant stirred each time Clara brushed Ellie's hair from her face, or looked up with that half-smile, the one that said she was still figuring things out, but she was willing to try. And yet, something still held him back. That evening, after Ellie had gone to bed with a new melody Clara had taught her, Jack sat alone at the kitchen table, flipping through one of Ethan's old notebooks. It was more sketchpad than journal pages of cockpit diagrams, song lyrics, half-finished letters, guitar chords. Halfway through, he found a page folded in two. He opened it. At the top, Ethan had written in his sharp, confident scrawl, "Things I never told Jack but should have." Jack froze. He read slowly, the words sinking deep. "Jack, if you're reading this, I probably messed up one last landing. You always said I flew too hard into things. Maybe you were right. You should know two things. First, I'm proud of you. Always have been. I know you carry more than you show. You kept the family together when Mom started forgetting our names. You stayed when I flew, and that matters. Second, Clara Monroe is not just a girl I dated. She's the best thing I ever had a chance at. And if I'm not here, and life does one of its crazy rewrites, and you find yourself wondering if it's okay to feel something for her, it is. She deserves to be seen, to be loved. Fully. And you, big brother, deserve someone who sees you. Don't let the past hold you hostage. That's not living." Jack stared at the letter for a long time. Outside, wind stirred in the trees. Inside, the heater hummed a low and steady tone. The words sat on the table like a second heartbeat. He found Clara sitting on the back porch, wrapped in Ellie's blue blanket, sipping tea, and staring out at the trees like she was reading something in their branches. He stepped outside without a word and sat beside her. After a long silence, Clara spoke. "I used to think closure meant finality, like turning the last page of a book. But sometimes closure is realizing the story doesn't end. It just changes chapters." Jack looked down at his hands. "I found a letter. From Ethan." She glanced at him, a flicker of emotion crossing her face. "You did?" He nodded. "It was in one of his old notebooks. He said he was proud of me. And he said, if something ever happened, he hoped I wouldn't let the past stop me from living." Clara wrapped her fingers tighter around the mug. He always had a way of making you feel like you could jump and still land on your feet, even if he rarely did. They both smiled faintly. Then Clara added more softly, "Do you think we're wrong? Sitting here like this, with all the memory between us?" Jack turned to her. "No. I think we're two people who've lived through loss, and now we're trying to figure out if there's something worth building in the quiet that comes after." She didn't answer right away. Then, with surprising steadiness, "I'm scared." "Me too," Jack admitted. They sat like that a while, letting honesty hang between them like fog lifting. Then Clara spoke again. "Did he write about the music?" Jack raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Clara smiled slightly. "Ethan once said that certain melodies could heal things faster than words ever could. I think that's why I started playing again." Jack looked out at the trees. "You're good. Ellie adores you. I adore her back. She's resilient." Jack said, his voice low. "She was born during a snowstorm, actually. My wife, Megan, she didn't make it through the labor. I've been raising Ellie alone ever since." Clara turned toward him, eyes soft. "I didn't know she said." "I don't talk about it," Jack replied. "Mostly because when I do, I start remembering not just the moment she left, but all the little things that came after. The first fever Ellie had. The first time she said mama in her sleep." Clara reached over and placed her hand gently over his. He didn't move away. "I'm not trying to replace anyone," she said quietly. "I know," he replied, "and I'm not asking you to." They sat in silence, hands still touching. Somewhere far off, an owl called into the night. And for once, Jack didn't feel the need to fill the silence. It was enough to sit there beside someone who didn't flinch from truth, who carried her own sorrows with grace, and who was willing just maybe to walk forward, even if the path was uncertain. Later, as Jack stood in the doorway watching Clara sleep on the couch, the silver pendant resting near her heart, he thought of Ethan's letter again. She deserves to be seen, to be loved, fully. Jack didn't know yet where the road would lead, but for the first time in years, he wanted to follow it. The first true thaw of spring came quietly. The snow didn't vanish all at once. It melted in small surrenders. Icicles broke from the porch roof and fell with soft thuds into damp earth. Streams trickled along the edge of the gravel drive. The pine trees, stoic through winter, now whispered as their limbs lightened. Inside Jack's cabin, the air had shifted too. Clara moved with more confidence now. Her limp was fading. She took short walks around the property when the sun peeked out, always returning with pine cones or little stones to give to Ellie, who now called her Miss C, as if she'd always belonged. And though Jack hadn't said it aloud, he felt the walls inside himself begin to soften the edges that grief had hardened for so long, rounding ever so slightly. That morning, Jack found Clara alone in the living room, seated at the piano bench, with a stack of aged sheet music in her lap. She was wearing one of his old flannel shirts again, this one red, and her hair was pulled back loosely, a few strands catching the golden morning light. He stood in the doorway for a moment, watching her scan a yellowed page. Then, clearing his throat gently, he stepped inside. "I found something," he said. She looked up. What kind of something? Jack walked to the bookshelf and reached behind a row of paperbacks. He pulled out a slim blue leather-bound journal, its cover worn and slightly warped by age and use. It was in Ethan's flight bag, he said. "I never opened it before, just figured it was technical notes or maps. But yesterday something told me to look." He handed it to her. Clara hesitated. "Are you sure?" "I think he meant for us to find it," Jack said. She opened it slowly. The pages were filled with tight, slanted handwriting, Ethan's voice preserved in ink. But about a third of the way through, folded and pressed flat, was a single sheet of stationery, different paper, neater script. Clara's fingers trembled slightly as she opened it. Jack stood back. She read silently, lips parted, slightly shallow. "Clara, I don't know how to start this letter because I don't know if I'll ever send it. But I have to write it anyway. Because there are things I need to say. And because for once in my life, I want to leave something behind that doesn't involve an engine or a flight plan. You changed something in me. I used to run toward adrenaline away from stillness. But with you, I wanted to sit still. I wanted to learn how to make soup, how to fold laundry the right way, how to listen without planning what to say next. If I don't make it back, I want you to know that what I felt for you was not fleeting. It was real. And if life continues without me, I hope it brings you joy. I hope it brings you music. And if by some miracle you and Jack ever cross paths, don't walk away. He's the better part of me. Tell him I said that. Or don't. Maybe he already knows." Clara didn't speak for a long while. Her eyes stayed fixed on the page, as if reading it again and again in her head. Finally, she folded the letter gently and set it on her lap. Jack waited. "I remember him writing one night," she said, her voice low. "He said it was nothing, just something to clear his head." Jack sat beside her. He cleared mine too. With that letter. She turned to him, eyes glassy but calm. "Do you think grief ever leaves? Or does it just change shape?" Jack considered that. "I think it learns how to share space, with joy, with hope, with whatever comes next." They sat in silence, the kind that asks nothing but presence. Then Clara spoke again. I'm not used to this, being seen. Not as the one who lost something, or the one holding it together. Just seen. You deserve that, Jack said quietly. Clara looked at him long and steady. So do you. That evening, as Clara played a soft lullaby on the piano and Ellie colored at her feet, Jack stepped outside for air. The sky was the color of ripe apricots, streaked with lavender clouds. He leaned against the railing of the porch, watching the fading light, thinking of all the ways the world could turn when you least expected it. Footsteps behind him. I brought your coat, Clara said, handing him his old brown jacket. Thanks. She didn't walk away. He glanced at her. She stood barefoot on the wooden planks, arms folded, wind teasing her hair. I've been thinking, she said. Maybe I don't want to go back. Jack's heart skipped. Clara continued, gaze fixed on the tree line. Not yet, anyway. I have sick days. And vacation, and maybe I owe myself some time to breathe. Jack nodded carefully. You're welcome here. For as long as you want. She turned to him. I don't want to stay just because you feel responsible for me. He met her eyes. You're not a responsibility. You're something else. She smiled quietly. I never told you why I became a music teacher. Jack tilted his head. Why my mother sang lullabies every night, even when she was sick. After she passed, I didn't want silence to win. Jack looked down at her hand, brushing his fingers lightly across hers. You've brought music back to this house. Clara's voice dropped to a whisper. And you brought me back to the sky. He looked at her, really looked. And then no rush, no grandeur, he leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a first kiss in the way movies made it dramatic. It was simple, grounded. A quiet agreement between two souls who had spent years loving ghosts and were finally ready to look forward. That night, as the wind brushed through thawing trees and moonlight slipped across the floorboards, Clara sat on the porch, a lone journal open on her lap. She wrote a letter, not to Ethan, but to herself. Today I said yes to something new, not to erase the past, but to walk beside it hand in hand with what comes next. And for the first time in years, I believe I deserve it. She closed the journal and smiled. Inside, Ellie sang softly in her sleep. And Clara knew life was composing a new melody, one where she was no longer the silence. But the song, the wind carried a different sound now. Gone was the mournful howl of winter. In its place came the tentative sighs of spring branches creaking under their own awakening weight, birds returning with unfamiliar songs, and somewhere off in the woods, the low rustle of life daring to begin again. Inside the cabin, something quieter was unfolding. Clara stood at the edge of Ellie's room, watching the child sleep beneath a tangle of stuffed animals and soft blankets. Her little chest rose and fell. Steadily, lips parted just slightly, one arm flung above her head in the careless abandon of trust. Clara smiled, a lump forming in her throat. It was a smile born of gratitude and of grief. That afternoon, she had received a call from her principal back in Denver. The school year was resuming post-storm. Her students were waiting. Emily, the girl she'd rescued, had returned home and reportedly asked for Clara 3 times in 1 week. There was warmth in that knowledge, but also weight. Clara had come to Pine Ridge by accident. She would leave by choice. Later, she found Jack in the garage, elbows deep in grease, and gears restoring an old 4-wheeler Ellie had begged him to fix up. She watched him in silence for a long moment before saying anything. I got the call. Jack straightened, slowly, wiping his hands with a rag. From the school. She nodded. They want me back. I think I need to go, at least for now. Jack didn't flinch, but something behind his eyes flickered just for a breath. That makes sense. Clara stepped further into the garage. It's not that I want to leave. I know. It's just, part of me needs to prove I can still choose, that I'm not stuck in grief, or defined by who I lost. Jack leaned back against the workbench, arms crossed. You don't have to explain. But she did. She needed to say it aloud, not for justification, but for clarity. I didn't know who I was anymore after Ethan died. Then the storm happened. The rescue. You. Ellie. It gave me a reason to feel again. And I don't want to lose that by staying too long and forgetting who I'm becoming. Jack gave a faint nod, eyes still steady. So you're going? Clara hesitated. Yes. But I'm not saying goodbye. Just not yet. He stepped toward her close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, smell the faint trace of pine and machine oil on his shirt. You don't owe me anything, Clara. She looked up at him. Really looked. I'm not trying to repay a debt, Jack. I'm trying to become someone who can love without being afraid again. And when I'm sure, when I'm whole, I'll come back. If you'll still have me. Jack studied her for a long, quiet second. Then he nodded. Slow and sure. There'll be a light on. Clara's voice caught. Always. He smiled, a little sad, a little hopeful. Always. The next morning, Ellie stood at the foot of Clara's bed, arms crossed, holding a folded piece of paper. You can't go, she said, plainly. Clara sat up, blinking. Sweetheart, I made you something, Ellie continued, thrusting the paper forward. Clara unfolded it gently. It was a drawing, the cabin, the three of them standing in front. Jack, tall and serious, Ellie with wild hair and a stick-figure smile, and Clara in a red dress holding a music note. Beneath it, in blocky letters, Ellie had written, My family. Clara's eyes blurred. I'll come back, she whispered. You promise I do. Ellie nodded slowly, then stepped forward and wrapped her arms around Clara's neck. You better. Or I'll steal your piano. Clara laughed into the little girl's shoulder. Deal. The drive back to Denver was long and winding, but not heavy. Clara kept one hand on the steering wheel, the other resting over the silver pendant she now wore every day. Ethan's memory not as a weight, but as a thread connecting her to where she'd been and where she might go. She stopped twice, once at a gas station, where she picked up juice boxes for Ellie to drink when she visited, and once on the ridge overlooking the valley. From there, she could see Pine Ridge as a patch of color below quiet, enduring home. Back at the cabin, Jack and Ellie stood on the porch. They didn't say much. They watched the road long after Clara's taillights disappeared, even though Jack knew she wouldn't be visible anymore. She'll be back, Ellie said confidently. Jack looked down. You believe that I know it. He nodded. Inside the piano sat silent again. But somehow Jack felt it was just resting, like a breath held between notes. Weeks passed. Jack went back to routine garage work, school runs, fixing things that broke, making pancakes on Sundays. But something had shifted. He found himself humming while he worked, making space in the cupboard, leaving a mug out each morning without thinking. Ellie continued her music lessons on her own. One afternoon, she sat at the piano playing halting notes of a tune Clara had taught her. Jack listened from the kitchen, one hand on a coffee cup, heart full and aching. That night, he sat by the fire and wrote a letter. To Ethan. To himself. Maybe to Clara, though he didn't know if he'd ever send it. I let her go, not because I wanted to lose her, but because I believed in her enough to trust she'd find her way back. And I believe in myself enough now to know I'm ready if she does. He folded the letter and slid it into the drawer beneath the radio. Spring bloomed slowly in Pine Ridge, and in Jack's chest something else bloomed, too quiet, resilient, patient. A kind of love that doesn't chase, but waits. Spring settled into Pine Ridge like a gentle confession. The snow was long gone now, revealing the rocky veins of mountain paths and tufts of new grass peeking through the thawed earth. The pines no longer groaned under weight, they swayed. Light came earlier, lingered longer. The air carried the distant murmur of thawed streams and the low hum of insects returning to life. And yet for Jack Remington, the silence inside the cabin had never felt louder. Not in a bitter or empty way. More like a room someone had just left, still warm, still full of presence, yet unmistakably absent. Clara's absence wasn't dramatic. She hadn't torn herself away. She'd left carefully, lovingly, with a promise, not a goodbye. But a promise is still a distance. Each morning, Jack still brewed 2 cups of coffee. The second sat untouched. Ellie noticed. She never said anything directly, but Jack caught her glancing at the mug, then at the piano, and then back at her father, with that inquisitive tilt of the head that children do when they sense a story isn't over. One Sunday morning, Ellie asked, "Do you think Miss C misses us?" Jack, still buttering toast, replied without hesitation, "I know she does." Ellie chewed slowly, then asked, "Do people always come back when they miss you?" Jack paused. He leaned down, brushed her bangs aside, and said, "Not always. But the right ones find their way back, even if it takes time." Ellie considered that for a long moment. Then, with complete sincerity, she replied, "Okay, I'll wait." The waiting became its own quiet ritual. Jack filled his time. The garage saw more business with the changing season, flat tires, dead batteries, old tractors breathing again under his hands. The physical labor helped grounding him, filling the hours with purpose. At night, he read. Sometimes Clara's journal entries would flash through his mind, though he had never read a single word of them. He imagined her handwriting neat, but expressive. Musical somehow. The letter from Ethan, too, returned in moments of stillness. "Don't let the past hold you hostage. That's not living." Jack wasn't hostage anymore, but he wasn't quite free either. Not yet. One afternoon in late April, a letter arrived. Not a phone call, not a text, an envelope, handwritten. Clara's cursive, just his name on the front. He opened it slowly on the porch, Ellie watching from the swing. Inside, Jack. It's been 4 weeks and the sky feels different without Pine Ridge beneath it. Denver is busy. My classroom is full of noise and color, but I catch myself listening for your quiet steadiness in the chaos. I miss your silence. Emily is thriving. She plays the piano now, just a few notes at a time. She doesn't know why Claire de Lune makes her cry, but she says it feels like someone remembering her. I'm remembering you. Not out of obligation. Not because you saved me, but because you gave me back parts of myself I thought had been buried with Ethan. I needed to come here to realize I wasn't broken, only paused. And I needed that pause to become something again. Not a shadow, but a woman who can love fully. Tell Ellie I wear her bracelet every day, the one with the yellow beads. She said it matched pancakes. She was right. I don't know when I'll be ready, but when I am, if there's still room, I'd like to come home. Yours. Clara. Jack read it twice, then a third time. He folded it, gently slipped it back into the envelope, and placed it on the windowsill beside Ethan's old guitar, an altar of sorts. Ellie didn't ask what it said. She just climbed into his lap and rested her head on his shoulder. That night, Jack sat at the piano. He wasn't a pianist, but he remembered enough from watching Clara and Ellie to press a few chords into being. They were clumsy, uneven, but honest. And sometimes that was enough. Weeks passed. The school year began to draw to a close. Jack built Ellie a treehouse in the backyard. He taught her how to hammer nails safely and how to spot the first buds on pine branches. He noticed she sang more freely now, little fragments of Clara's lullabies woven into her play. One evening after dinner, Ellie looked up from her sketch pad and asked, When Miss C comes back, can we have a picnic? Jack raised an eyebrow. Planning ahead, I'm practicing hope, she said matter-of-factly. Jack smiled, heart-tightening. I think she'd love that. On the first day of May, Jack received another letter. Shorter this time. Jack, I've requested a leave of absence. 3 weeks. I'd like to spend them with you, if the offer still stands. Clara. He didn't write back. He didn't call. He just drove to town and bought fresh tulips, the kind Clara had once said reminded her of her mother's garden. He placed them in a mason jar on the windowsill next to her letter, and waited. May 5th. Mid-morning. Ellie burst through the cabin door, her hair still messy from sleep, shouting, "She's here! The blue car? She's here!" Jack walked outside slowly, heart racing hands, shaking in that quiet, hidden way that only men like him feel. Clara stepped out of the car. She wasn't glowing. She wasn't dramatically changed. She was just Clara. Real. Present. Eyes full of meaning and memory and choice. Jack walked toward her. She didn't speak right away. Instead, she pulled from her bag a small music box, brass-dented simple. She opened it. The first soft notes of Clair de Lune drifted into the mountain air. "I brought music with me," she said. Jack reached for her hand. "Welcome home," he replied. The first evening of Clara's return unfolded like a long-awaited refrain, familiar, soft, and slightly uncertain, as if each note was being carefully rediscovered. The golden sun dipped low behind the ridge, casting a honeyed glow over the clearing, washing the porch in gentle amber light. Clara stood on the back deck, arms wrapped around herself, not from the chill spring had turned generous, but from the weight of being exactly where her heart had longed to be. Behind her, the screen door creaked open. Jack stepped out holding 2 mugs of chamomile tea steam curling upward in the quiet dusk. "You still like it plain?" he asked. Clara smiled, with a hint of honey now. He turned back inside without a word, and returned moments later with a spoon clinking gently against the rim of her mug. They sipped in silence. Below them, Ellie was gathering pine cones into a basket, organizing them by size and color, like treasures from a forgotten kingdom. "You built her a treehouse," Clara said softly. Jack nodded. "She designed it. I just did the dangerous parts. She's grown. She's steadier. And a little bossier." Clara chuckled, then her smile faded into something quieter. Being away felt like listening to a song without lyrics. I knew the melody, but I couldn't sing along. Jack glanced at her. "And now I think I'm ready to write new words." They stood there as the sky deepened into navy, the first stars blinking into view. Later, inside the cabin, Ellie insisted they celebrate. "We need candles," she declared, standing on a chair to reach the drawer where birthday leftovers were kept. Clara raised an eyebrow. "It's not anyone's birthday." "It's not a birthday party," Ellie said with solemn conviction. "It's a coming back party." She arranged 3 paper plates and placed a half-eaten chocolate chip muffin on the center of the table. 3 candles stuck out at odd angles, burning slightly crooked. Jack lit them without protest. They sang not Happy Birthday, but a tune Clara had taught Ellie weeks before. A simple folk melody about home and hearth and the people who find us when we've forgotten how to look. When they finished, Ellie clapped. "Make a wish, Miss C." Clara closed her eyes, and for the first time in years, she didn't wish for the past to return. She wished for the courage to fully step into the future, after Ellie had been tucked in her arms tightly wrapped around both her bear and the pine cone she'd named Prince Woody Jack, and Clara sat on the floor by the fireplace. The flames were small but steady. Clara held a mug of cocoa between her palms, warming her hands. Her legs were curled beneath her, and the silver pendant rested just above the collar of her sweater. She stared into the fire. "I was afraid you wouldn't want me back." Jack shook his head gently. You don't owe me presents, Clara. You owe yourself peace. I kept waiting for a sign, she whispered. Something big. But it wasn't a grand epiphany. It was music in a classroom, laughter in an empty hallway, my own voice echoing back. I realized I wasn't waiting to be saved. I was waiting to save myself. Jack didn't speak. He simply reached out his hand, resting over hers. She turned her palm upward and laced their fingers together. I don't need certainty, Clara said. I just want to be with someone who can sit with me in the silence. Jack smiled faintly. Then you're exactly where you're meant to be. The next day, they spent the afternoon planting wildflower seeds along the edges of the property. Clara wore Ellie's old sun hat, slightly too small, and Jack rolled his sleeves up to his elbows, revealing forearms tanned and lined from years of work. Ellie led the charge, declaring which flower would go where with the authority of a seasoned gardener. Sunflowers on the left, daisies by the porch, and lavender in the corner, because that's where Miss C likes to read. Clara turned, surprised. I never told you that. Ellie grinned. I just know. They planted until the light began to fade, fingers coated in earth laughter tucked into every hole they dug. Clara stood for a moment as Jack gathered the tools. She looked out at the field, imagining the blooms that would come. She thought of roots anchoring into soil, unseen but vital. She felt rooted again. That evening, after Ellie had gone to bed early, exhausted from her self-appointed role as garden supervisor, Jack brought out a bottle of wine he'd been saving since Christmas. They sat on the porch steps, passing one glass back and forth, the night air soft against their skin. Clara looked up at the stars. I think I've stopped asking why things happened the way they did. Jack turned to her. I used to wake up every morning wondering why Ethan got on that helicopter, why Megan didn't survive childbirth, why I was left holding the pieces. And now I've started asking what I'm meant to do with what I have left. Clara reached up, brushing her thumb along his jawline. Maybe that's what healing sounds like. Not a grand chorus, just one voice saying I'm still here. Jack leaned in, and this time their kiss was not tentative. It was sure. It was earned. No ghosts, no shadows, just two people choosing each other. Later, as the moon rose high and silver behind the trees, Jack took Clara's hand and led her to the piano. I've been practicing something, he said sheepishly. Clara raised an eyebrow. You playing, he nodded. Don't expect miracles. She sat beside him as he played a halting version of Amazing Grace. His fingers stumbled, and a few wrong notes rang out, but she didn't correct him. She placed her hand over his, and together they found the rhythm. By the final note, Jack exhaled. Clara whispered, That was beautiful. I missed a third of the notes. You found the ones that mattered. The town of Pine Ridge gathered for its annual spring festival, with the kind of warmth only small towns could muster. Potluck tables, groaning under casseroles, and peach cobbler local kids chasing one another with balloons tied to their wrists, and folding chairs circling a makeshift stage, strung with fairy lights and an old American flag. Jack stood at the edge of it all, his hands in his pockets, watching Ellie run across the field with a daisy crown slipping sideways on her head. Her laughter danced in the wind. Beside him, Clara smoothed the skirt of her pale yellow sundress, the same color as Ellie's favorite pancakes. Her hair was pinned loosely, tendrils escaping to frame her face. There was music in her movements even when she wasn't playing, especially then. You nervous, Jack asked, tilting his head toward the stage. Clara smiled faintly. Only if I let myself remember there's a crowd. It's just neighbors. Judgy neighbors, Jack chuckled. You'll be fine. They've heard worse. She bumped his shoulder lightly. That's comforting. In truth, she hadn't performed publicly in over a year. But when the town committee, desperate for performers, asked Jack if he knew anyone who could play piano for the closing ceremony, Ellie had answered before he could. My Miss C is magic, she'd said. So Clara had said yes. And now here they were. As sunset tipped the sky into soft rose and lavender, Jack stepped onto the stage with a microphone in hand. His voice carried steady across the field. Evening, everyone. Hope you've had enough lemonade and deviled eggs to forget the mud under your boots. Laughter rippled. I won't keep you long, but before we close out the night, we have something special. Someone special. He looked toward Clara, who stood just off stage, hands clasped in front of her. A few months ago, most of you didn't know the name Clara Monroe, and now I'd wager most of you wouldn't forget it. She's a teacher, a rescuer, a neighbor, and one of the kindest people I've ever met. Clara blinked, surprised by his candor. She's also taught my daughter and me a thing or two about grace. Tonight she's going to share something that brought healing to our home, and I think might do the same for all of us. He stepped back. Clara took a deep breath and walked into the light. The crowd applauded, gently, respectfully. She nodded, once sat at the upright piano placed center stage, and adjusted the microphone down toward her lips. I used to believe music needed to be perfect, she said quietly, eyes scanning the faces before her. Then I learned that the songs we remember most are the ones that found us when we were broken. A hush fell over the crowd. Clara's fingers touched the keys. The opening notes of Clair de Lune rose like a memory from beneath her hands, fluid, aching, tender. The melody wove through the evening air like smoke from a candle just extinguished, a hymn for everyone who'd ever loved and lost, for those who stayed, and those who returned. Somewhere near the back, someone wiped away a tear. In the front row, Ellie held Jack's hand without realizing it. As the final notes lingered in the stillness, Clara sat back slightly. Then, without a word, she transitioned into amazing grace. Not the typical arrangement, but a variation, her own interpretation. The chords were slower, layered with the gentle touch of grief and the hopeful echo of renewal. Halfway through, Jack stepped onto the stage with his guitar slung over his shoulder. Clara looked up, startled. He met her eyes, smiled, and took a seat beside her. She nodded. Together they played her piano soft, and searching his guitar steady and grounding. They didn't look at the crowd, didn't try to impress. They simply shared. Their music spoke of snowstorms and silence of rescue, and waiting of letters never sent, and the kind of love that builds slowly like a house meant to last. By the end, no one clapped right away. There was only quiet. Then Ellie stood and clapped, once loud and proud. The sound broke the spell. Applause followed, thunderous in its sincerity. Clara looked at Jack, eyes glistening. He leaned closer, his voice just above the noise. Told you they'd love it. She laughed, the sound catching in her throat. Later, as the crowd thinned and lanterns were extinguished one by one, Clara and Jack walked side by side toward the clearing where his truck was parked. Ellie skipped ahead, holding a glowing jar with a single firefly inside. Jack glanced sideways. That was brave. Clara smiled. It was necessary. You played like you meant it. I did. They reached the truck. Jack opened the door for her but didn't let go of her hand. What happens next? He asked. Clara looked up at the sky, vast, starlit, expectant. I go home, she said. With you. And we keep writing this song, however long it takes. Jack brought her hand to his lips, kissed it gently. You sure I've never been more. Back at the cabin, Ellie was already asleep in the back seat. Jack carried her inside, tucked her in, and left the firefly jar glowing faintly on her nightstand. Clara stood by the fireplace, arms folded, watching the flames dance. When Jack returned, she turned to him. Do you believe people get more than one chance? She asked. Jack stepped closer. I believe the sky's big enough to hold every wrong turn and every return. She wrapped her arms around him, resting her head on his chest. "You still fix things," she murmured. "Only the ones worth fixing." He kissed the top of her head, then her forehead, then her lips. There was no storm this time. No rescue. Just two hearts learning how to stay. Summer in Pine Ridge came not with fanfare, but with slow, golden certainty. The meadows turned lush and wild with blooms. Bees dipped lazily between lavender stalks Clara had planted with Ellie in late May. The treehouse, now reinforced and painted a brave shade of turquoise, became headquarters for picnics, secrets, and the occasional dramatic reading of Ellie's handmade poetry, usually rhymed stories about frogs falling in love with princesses. Life in the Remington cabin unfolded like a song without chorus, every day, new every note, meaningful even in its quiet. Clara had not gone back to Denver, at least not yet. She still had her apartment, still received letters from former students, but now they came with drawings of pine trees and questions like, "Is Mr. Jack your husband?" Yet the answer for now was no. But she had moved her favorite books onto Jack's shelves, her tea tins into his cupboard, and her music across the walls of the home. They hadn't spoken about marriage, not directly. Love for them wasn't something to be formalized in vows and announcements. Not yet. Not until it was ready. They were letting it grow. On a warm July morning, Clara found Jack sitting on the porch, with his back against the wooden column, Ellie curled beside him, her feet tucked into his lap. He was reading aloud from a book of poetry, Wendell Berry, she guessed by the rhythm of it. Clara paused in the doorway, watching the curve of his voice wrap around Ellie like a blanket. The man who had once lived in silence had learned to share space with sound. She joined them sitting on the other side of Jack. He didn't miss a beat in the reading, but his hand reached out instinctively and found hers. That was love, she thought. Not the grand gestures, not even the music, but the quiet, sure reaching. Later that day, Jack surprised Clara with a short drive up the ridge. Ellie stayed behind with a neighbor armed with juice boxes and instructions for her babysitter to address her as Captain Ellie. The road wound upward, shaded by pine and birch. Clara rested her hand on the windowsill breeze rippling through her fingers. "Where are we going?" she asked. "You'll see." When they reached the summit, Jack parked beside a small clearing. There, nestled in the tall grass, was the old Bell 206 helicopter, Ethan's bird, now fully restored and glinting under the sun. Clara stepped out slowly. "She's beautiful," she said. Jack came around, opened the passenger door, and offered his hand. "Come fly with me." Clara blinked. "You're flying," he nodded. "Not far. Just enough." As the engine roared to life, Jack guided them into the sky with calm, practiced ease. The valley spread out beneath them, roofs and roads, like patchwork rivers, like ribbons of memory. Clara watched the horizon hand on the window. It's like seeing your life from above. Everything small and survivable. Jack glanced over. Ethan used to say the sky told the truth about us. Clara turned toward him. "What's it saying now?" Jack smiled. "That we made it." He took her along the edge of the canyon, then circled wide over the meadow behind the cabin, where Ellie had arranged sticks into the shape of a giant heart, her surprise for Miss C and Dad. Clara laughed when she saw it, tears brimming at the edges of joy. When they landed again, the wind swirled, gently catching the edges of Clara's dress as she stepped down. Jack remained still for a moment beside the chopper, then reached into his pocket. He didn't drop to one knee. He simply took Clara's hand and placed something into it. A simple gold ring with a pale blue stone. "It was my mother's," he said. "And I don't need an answer today, or even this year. I just wanted you to know the door's open, the light's on." Clara closed her hand around the ring. "Let's walk through it together," she said. "Maybe not today." but soon. Jack nodded, understanding her perfectly. They spent the evening on the porch, Ellie playing barefoot in the grass, the sky blazing orange and pink above the treetops. Clara leaned into Jack's shoulder, her voice low. I think about Ethan sometimes. Me too. But now when I do, I don't just see the loss. I see the way he left echoes. You, this home, that sky. Jack kissed her hair. What the wind remembers. Clara looked up. What? That's what you are, Jack said. You're what the wind remembers. Not what it lost, but what it carried forward. As the stars blinked open one by one, Clara returned to the piano inside. She sat quietly for a moment, hands resting over the keys. Then she began to play. Not Clair de Lune, not Amazing Grace, but something new. A piece she hadn't written down, but had lived into being. Jack sat nearby, eyes closed, just listening. The melody climbed, dipped, lingered. It was a song made of snowstorms and second chances of yellow beads and broken letters. Of the moment, silence becomes music again. When the final note faded, Clara looked over her shoulder. Jack met her eyes. No words passed between them. They weren't needed. That night, long after Ellie had fallen asleep after the fire had gone to embers, Jack and Clara lay in bed, beneath the open window, the summer breeze threading through their fingers as they held hands across the sheets. I'm not afraid anymore, Clara whispered. Jack squeezed her hand. Then we've already won. And in the quiet that followed, they listened to the wind outside. It did not howl. It sang. Before you go, we'd love to know. Where in the world are you listening from? Share a little hello in the comments below. We read every one, and it means more than you know. If this story touched something in you, if it reminded you that healing is possible even after life's hardest storms, consider subscribing. We have more heartfelt journeys waiting, and you won't want to miss them. From our hearts to yours, thank you for spending time with us today. Take care of yourself, and until next time, keep a little hope in your pocket.